Another week rolls by. Here we are, enjoying a bit of tipple with friends, trying to solve the world's problems, discussing things we know nothing about. Welcome, gentlemen. We have a stranger in the house.
He's not a stranger. Sonny's been a good mate of ours for a minute.
Has he? I've known him. I know about good mates.
Unfortunately, Mkanya can't join us. He's somewhere sober. Best believe doing something more serious and meaningful than having a tipple. Well, he's away for a couple of weeks.
Well, suffice to say, the kettle's taking a break this week. We've actually got a more reasonable man among us.
100%.
Yes, we don't have these weird
Happy to participate.
shrub juices and teas and coffees. We're going to have a tipple.
You do know he'll watch the show at some point, right?
Yes,
Yeah, like we care what he thinks. Well, anyway, in his honor, I'm wearing a hat.
Yeah, because you got a haircut. Last time you were wearing a hat because you hadn't combed your hair. What's the occasion today?
Well, because Tinashe's not here. I'm wearing a hat because it's spring.
Ah, you're the fashionista today.
Yes. I'm sure he'll have something to say about that.
Definitely a notch up.
So, what are we drinking?
Oh, today we've got some of the good stuff, and I am delighted to report that this is a gift from a friend of ours, an investment banker who founded Acribos and Credit Connect. Our friend Edmund.
Edmund.
Oh, thanks, Eddie.
Turns out he's a fan of the show, and he insisted that if we're going to drink on his account, we drink the good stuff. So we're having an Islay single malt, the 16-year-old Lagavulin. It is quite peaty and incredibly smooth. It's a blend. It's one of those whiskeys that I would never adulterate with ice and water. That's why me and Titch are going to have it neat.
I'll have it on the rocks.
You take your role as the anchor too seriously and adulterating good whiskey with ice, but that's okay.
Well, you'll be pleased or interested to know, my father-in-law and I. Gee, what kind of shots were you pouring, Rufaro?
Well,
You'll be interested to know, my father-in-law and I have shared some very special moments over bottles of this.
Yeah.
Maybe suffice to leave it at that. Shumba?
Well, he's got good taste.
No, he's got good taste. I mean, I must say that he's the father of my wife.
Yeah.
But
To Edmund, Acribos and Credit Connect.
Edmund,
Cheers.
Acribos, Credit Connect.
cheers.
Cheers.
This is good.
Every time. This is going to be an interesting show.
Yeah.
So, this week we commemorate 2 years of Bob's demise. It might be interesting to spend a bit of time dwelling on Mugabenomics, the ideology, the good, the bad, the ugly. And maybe while we've got you here, Titch, maybe you want to kick us off. What do you make of Mugabenomics, especially in the first half of his reign, sort of 80s to late 90s, about 97, 98-ish?
Well, I think, thanks, George. It's really good to have drinks with you guys. It's really been a while since I've had anything to drink with you. So it's quite refreshing. When I watched the news 2 days ago and I realized that it's 2 years ago since Bob passed away. And one of the things that struck me is what an extraordinary man. He lived through a war for independence. He lived through a transition from colonial era to Zimbabwe, and lived through a land reform program, and even got to live through a military-assisted transition. So he was a man of many...
The coup that was not a coup.
Yeah.
And you missed marrying a young wife.
Well, I think that tends to be necessary when you're a man of power.
Okay, move on.
But what strikes me about the first half was, look, ahead of independence, we had Zanda and Zipra supported by the Russians and the Chinese. And then soon after we gained independence, Mugabe goes to get support from the Americans and the British. So for the first couple of years...
That was quite a bait and switch.
Yes, it was. But then it fell into the Cold War of the time. So, in saying that Bob was a man of many colors, you saw that before independence, you saw that after independence. Not only that, you'll also notice that he didn't realize how tough the choices facing his office were. We had 36,000 civil servants in 1980.
And we've got 400,000 now.
Well, wait. In 1982, we had 160,000.
What?
And in 1981, we had raised $1 billion in grant funding to help with this transition. We had loans from the IMF and World Bank and a whole lot of other grants which we were never told about. What that did is it created the
We got $1 billion of free money.
Yes. And our budget at the
what a
time
grant
was...
is the last time I checked.
And our budget
In
was...
1980 money.
Yes.
$1 billion of free money.
Yes. And our budget at the time was $1 billion. So it's fair to say he did have a good start, but then he didn't realize that.
So we could have lived on grant money alone for a year.
Yes, we could have. But
Did we have a surplus?
Yes, we had a surplus, but we couldn't have lived on grant funding because the rate at which we were employing new civil servants, teachers particularly, nurses and doctors, was so rapid because they went on a social program when they could have balanced out the social program with the economic program.
No, what balance? Come on.
Well, the balance came in 92 when we started the economic structural adjustment program, and that's a decision that Mugabe had to take because we'd spent the first 12 years just running on a social program funded on grants, loans, and who knows whatever else.
Was there an alternative?
Of course, there was an alternative.
Oh, just leave our people in the dark ages.
No.
Don't educate them, let them die.
So I think that this is a false dichotomy, a false choice that people always put out there between free market capitalism and welfare states that help societies least and most vulnerable with their education, with their healthcare. So I don't think that we could have done all the things that Titch has spoken to and liberalized the economy, opened it up, and grown it much more aggressively.
How would we have paid for it?
Well, you don't pay for anything to make economic reform, to open things up. So if you think about what he's speaking to in terms of 1992 and the structural reform that led to the entrepreneurs like the gentleman that started NMB coming through and that boom in entrepreneurship that we saw in the 90s, there's no reason why we couldn't have done that 10 years earlier in the 80s or in 1980, but we didn't.
So wait. But there's two issues here. There's the social spending, and you sort of said, what? We went on a binge.
Yes, we
spending on social services. But you're talking about structural reform.
Absolutely. So we could have done all that spending and
funded it,
and not
by a growing economy.
No. Well, look, if we had all these Western powers who were enamored with us and wanted to help us along and give us free money. So if somebody's going to give you free money, why say no? It's just like these SDRs that we're receiving now. It's manna from heaven. Let's take it. Let's make the most of it. So these Western nations that were giving us grants and loans or soft loans in the early 80s, I think that was the smart play to take that money. But at the same time, we should have liberalized.
Do you agree? Is that the missed opportunity of the 80s?
Yes and no, because what Rufaro is doing is he's just pointing in a direction, and he seems to be forgetting that you also need to give us how to get there. The truth is,
you should come on the show more often.
They had no way of knowing how to get there. These were guerrillas. They dealt with zero-sum game for many years, and what you're describing is a situation where they would have to choose between social spending and economic liberalization. And they didn't feel they had that choice.
I beg to differ though, because at around about the same time, right, the Chinese under Deng, right, this is exactly the time that in 1981, Deng visited Singapore and he saw what Lee Kuan Yew had done there. And he was impressed enough that he sent a lot of Chinese people, a lot of Chinese government senior bureaucrats to Singapore to learn from their model.
But didn't we do the same? Didn't we second a lot of our civil servants to Western countries?
We're still seconding them to Western countries, Eastern countries, Northern countries. How does that help?
So it's about vision and leadership. So, which is why I hold Deng in such high esteem, because he took over from Mao. He had known nothing but Maoist ideology, but he had the maturity and wisdom to realize that it wasn't working and that China needed a different model to take it forward. And he looked around the world and he saw what Lee Kuan Yew was doing in Singapore, and he said, you know what? Perhaps I can learn from Singapore. Perhaps we can take their policy framework and adapt it to China and take the country forward.
No, but Rufaro, are you not being unfair in comparing Mugabe to Deng? Shouldn't Mugabe be compared to Mao as the founder?
Interesting. So do we have Deng now?
Well,
we are not going to be baited into answering that question.
Okay.
But shouldn't Mugabe be compared to Mao?
I think he should, as the founding father, and that's probably where ideologically, that's where he is grounded. But I think that so he had the benefit of interacting with the Chinese and the Soviets and the British and the Americans, and we actually, you know, in as much as during the liberation struggle, his financial partners were the Chinese and the Soviets. Post-independence, the guys who actually came to the party with the most funding were Westerners. So I think he had...
Does that affect?
Yes, but then there's a context which should be understood. There was the Cold War, which ended in 1999, and under the Cold War, Zimbabwe would have become a playground of the Eastern Bloc, the Communist Bloc, and so it made no sense for the Western countries to ignore Zimbabwe. Bear in mind also that just ahead of independence, Henry Kissinger became very interested in the Zimbabwe story. And his interest had a lot less to do with us and a lot more to do with the Soviets and the Chinese.
And South Africa.
Yes, and South Africa.
We were the bulwark.
Yeah, so the fact that they came with money had a lot less to do with us. It had everything to do with the subcontext.
Does that matter?
Yes, it does.
Why?
Because as soon as all of that started to fall away, we had a hard time accessing foreign money, particularly from the West.
No, okay.
So there was no sustainability in the model.
Well, it lasted 10 years, right? So if you're getting free money for 10 years, surely it's incumbent upon you to make a plan to wean yourself.
Is 10 years enough to finance for a country that had such huge
because it's a stimulus. It's like when you jumpstart a car, right? You have a challenge, and this is just a temporary solution. But any reasonable person knows that they can't jumpstart their car every time they need to go someplace. They need to fix the underlying issues and wean themselves.
Only if they've ever driven a car before.
Yes, that's a good point, George. Because a lot of these guys came out of war. They were guerrillas. So what you have were guerrillas who had to manage an economy in the manner in which you seem to describe. But they didn't have sufficient skilling or experience. And those that didn't have sufficient voice within the context of their colleagues. So what we had eventually is a small group of people who knew and understood what needed to be done. Bob was the leader, but there wasn't sufficient backing to take that kind of economic decision.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're going down a rabbit hole.
Okay.
But, right, here we are, late 2021.
Right.
This is what Bob did for 17 years. And these were the results. Lessons for Mr. Mnangagwa.
Well, I think every leader has to learn their own lessons. And every period in time has its own challenges. I think the main challenge that I would say exists is the ability to fully absorb diverse ideas and allow them a chance to thrive and be thrown out if need be.
Don't be politically correct. What would you do if you were him? I mean, knowing what you know about what Bob did, what do you think Edie and Ntuli should do now?
Bob was brilliant, but he was rigid. So I would say ED needs to be flexible because there's no single solution.
Well, I beg to differ. I think that we've got more than 150 years of modern history. And we have different models, right?
Yes.
So we've got the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
They took over 1917, and they ran this experiment called socialism, and it failed miserably. We have Mao's experience in China. He took over that country in 1949, and he ran it pretty much until he died. And we know the results of that experiment. It failed miserably. It doesn't work. Socialism, communism, doesn't work. And we've got examples of countries that have chosen a different path.
Cuba.
Yeah. In fact, I like that you speak to
Are
Cuba.
we going down a rabbit hole again?
No. He raises a valid counterfactual.
Big word.
At a certain level, right? You've got no choice but to be impressed with Cuba. They have fantastic healthcare. The education system works.
Exactly.
The trains run on time. It's functional. Okay. But if you actually go to Havana, the place looks like the Twilight Zone. You've got cars from the 50s and 60s on the roads, right? And recently,
tourism is so big because of those cars.
we recently saw, a couple of weeks ago, serious protests because the Cubans that actually live there know that their lives could be so much better under a different policy framework. If they were allowed to be entrepreneurial, if there was reforms that brought in more free market capitalism. So
you're speaking to a Cuba post Castro. So the current leadership is not as strong, is not as charismatic, and is unable to hold the center. What Castro 1 and Castro 2 were able to do was hold the country together. And you're talking about a transitory situation.
I'm not even sure how we went from Mugabenomics to Castronomics.
These were his friends.
Coming back to Zim.
This is a good time now for us to take a break because Musoni's got to run.
Yes.
But thank you for passing by.
Yeah, cheers, guys. It's been good.
Yeah.
Cheers, Rafara.
We should do this more often.
100%. I'll make time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome back. It was good fun having Musoni along for the last segment. But for the second segment, we're joined by another very old friend. I've known him since I was grade 1, literally. Tafadzwa, and we share a name. His first name is my middle name. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm very excited to be here and just to experience the other side of the camera.
So what are you drinking?
And why are you not drinking something proper?
This is something proper. I think I'm more a beer person than a whiskey. I do drink whiskey from time to time, but I think local is lacquer for me.
Well,
you should pour it properly.
No, that is the proper way of pouring it. So to let the foam come out, you don't want it foaming in your stomach.
That's wise. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Tafadzwa, so before you join us, we had Titch on the show, and we are commemorating the second anniversary of Bob's death. And we've just been talking about Mugabenomics. Titch took us through the first 17 years. Well, he didn't really. He just spewed some stuff about the first 17 years. What's your take on Mugabenomics? And maybe dwell on the latter years.
Okay, I think I'll go to the 97 to maybe 2017, which coincides with the second 20 years of my life, being from 20 to 40. Are you that old? Much older. I looked basically. I just tried to look at everything and come up with two or three major things that I picked up as major points in that particular period. The first being the land reform. The first question that I would have would be, was it necessary or not? But I firmly believe that it was necessary to address the colonial imbalances in land ownership in this country. So I don't know. Do you think it was necessary?
Certainly there was a historical gross inequality that had to be addressed. Is there a good way or a bad way to do it? I don't know. I think it's a moral question. and I think each of us will have a different moral take on it. And I must confess, I'm a beneficiary of land reform, so my argument will always be affirmative. But I can see alternative views. I don't know.
Yeah, look, so I am empathetic to both Tafazo's view and your view, but I like to approach it from a more pragmatic perspective to say, what is the outcome that you're looking for, right? The policy or the decisions that you take should be a function of the outcome that you're looking for. And so the question is, in my mind, which is what problem was land reform solving for? And if we can agree on what that problem was that it was solving, then we can assess it and say, so did it work, or was it the best policy to solve that problem?
Good point.
Okay. My view, like I said, is to address the colonial imbalances where when colonization happened, people were taken off their land, which was normally prime land, and they were put into less arable land. And so therefore, you have a lot of people on very poor land and a few people on the most arable land. So I think for me personally, I think the necessity was there to address it, but the first thing I have a problem with was the execution of it.
Yeah, but you're not answering my question. My question is, what is the outcome that you're looking for?
Well, that Mugabe was looking for.
Yeah. What X are you solving for?
To address the
injustice or the imbalance.
The imbalance caused by colonization.
Okay, and so was land reform the best vehicle for that, though? Because you could have said, somebody else could have, okay, let me give you an alternative hypothetical solution, right? Somebody could have said, you know what, to the successful commercial white farmers, you guys are benefiting from a historical injustice. So if the tax for the average Zimbabwean is, say, 20%, for the next 25, 30 years, you guys must pay 60%. And we're going to put that extra revenue in a pot that's going to deal with education, housing, and healthcare for Zimbabweans who were disenfranchised by colonialism, right? So I'm not saying that's a perfect solution. I'm just putting it out there that, there are alternatives, right? That we could have dreamt up that might have moved the needle further in terms of emancipating the people who suffered the most from colonial imperialism, right?
I'm not sure I understand.
So I don't know.
Yeah, your phone doesn't agree with you.
Okay, look, my view on that is that what needed to be addressed was there was a large number of people on very poor quality land. So if that's the case, you can't address it by taxing somebody more because they still are on very poor quality land.
Well, Rufaro's point is, was the problem that they were on poor land, or was the problem that they're poor?
I think it's a bit of both, and you'd have to look at the history behind it. What was...
I think we're left to the history, but the thing is, if you take somebody who's on marginal land and is poor, like George has pointed out, and they've never run a huge commercial farming operation, right? And then you move them from a marginal piece of land where they're struggling, and you put them onto a much bigger, more arable piece of land where the yields would naturally be better. Have you empowered those individuals? Because maybe they can't...
But Rufaro, I think Tafazo was about to explain that. Maybe I should let him explain. But I think you were getting at that the problem was not only economic.
Yeah, it's not economic. The issue is the whole issue was people wanted land to be able to farm on it. So effectively, you can't move them. You can't move them. You can't empower them without moving them onto more arable land. So I think that the real issue is that they had to be moved. The execution becomes the question.
So you're going into cultural issues around land,
yeah.
and the social beliefs around land.
Correct. Yeah. So the issue becomes the execution. So I agree with you that there were several issues around the execution that were poor. One, it was done too quickly. Two, there was violence attended to it, and it was very disruptive to the economy. So if it was done, so if, for example, we started in 1990 to 2000, you probably could have done it where maybe the farmers that were there, maybe if you have 1,000 hectares and it gets downsized to maybe 300, you're still there, you still have a business, and then you put more people on it. There's different ways. The mechanics are obviously limited.
I don't think it's controversial. I don't think there's anybody who thinks that the way we executed land reform, whether you think it was a good idea or a bad idea, I don't think there's anybody who looks at our history of land reform and thinks that is the model, that is the best, that is like the gold standard of how to do land reform. I don't think anybody thinks that. I think the execution was abysmal, but I think that it's a legitimate question whether that is the best way to empower the people we're trying to empower.
But okay, I think of greater relevance to us is, okay, so maybe Mr. Mugabe got it wrong in the manner he did it, but we are where we are today. What would be your advice to Dr. Masuka and ED?
Okay, I think for me, there's two general questions around it. The first one being how productive are they, and the second one being security of tenure. So basically, do they have title to the land, etc. And I think it answers, if you address one, you address the other. So if, for example, the first thing you have to do is maybe map out how many farmers were there before, which I assume is about 5,000, and how many farmers are there now. And so take those title deeds and transfer them to, like, maybe say a state to the state, or maybe to a state land company, for example, which owns the land. But however, on the title you have you note who the prior owner was and how much is due to them, and then you probably put the 99-year lease on that title deed. So there is a bit of, and then you also try and maybe give them.
So you're saying the new farmer leases from the old farmer?
No. You
From the state, because
from the state. You transfer
to the
the
state.
title from the old farmer to the state.
But the state didn't pay for this.
Yes, but you note the obligation. So I must,
Well, the state expropriated the land, so that's okay.
Okay. All right.
I'm because there's been some negotiations with the former farmers. I
Yeah,
suspect.
we owe them $5 billion.
Yes.
So what do you think about that number, just out of curiosity? $3.5 billion that we owe for...
Five, because we're late now.
Oh, we're late already?
Yes, we
Wow.
missed the deadline.
Yeah. Do you think that's a reasonable number, $5 billion, to owe for improvements only?
Probably. The average. How many dams are there? The average cost of a dam is probably maybe $2.5 million.
So not really, but okay, yeah.
Well, you'd have to quantify them, but why would we agree to pay? I actually look at it probably more as a discount than.
Okay. Anyway, rabbit hole. So we transfer. You think we should have transferred title to the state, then created like new subtitles on the old title.
No, leases. Because there are other jurisdictions in the world, like the UK, I think, is an
Why
example.
are you saying what he thinks?
No, I'm not saying what he thinks. I'm just explaining to you that there are other jurisdictions in the world where there's both title and then leases on top of the title.
Yeah. That's what he said. He says first.
Yeah. Like in the UK, if a lease is more than 7 years, it has to go on the title.
And that's what you're saying.
Yeah. So effectively, you register those, and I think that there also needs to be an opportunity for people to be able to acquire that title as well. So if they pay a certain amount that equates to what needs to be paid to the former farmer, I think because we should get away from the taxpayer paying for it, rather have whoever's benefiting from the group of people who benefit from it should pay the old farmers, in my view, over maybe giving.
So I should pay.
Yeah, you should pay.
You should pay.
Why?
Because you're benefiting.
You've benefited, so why should we
Yeah,
pay?
but it's not my fault you didn't benefit.
No. The world doesn't work that way. I mean, like, if I have no interest in farming, right? Why should I be picking up your bill for improvements on a piece of land that you're benefiting from? How does that make any sense?
Okay.
When I buy
Farmers are
food
special.
from you, do you not pay?
My view, though, is that you have received an asset, you should pay for it.
So you guys reckon the beneficiaries of land reform should pay?
Should pay for
For the improvements.
the
Well,
improvement.
they should pay this bill. This
Absolutely.
$3.5, $5 billion bill should be paid by the people who got the land.
Yes.
I don't think that's controversial. I think you're biased, and I think if you weren't a farmer, you might have a different view.
Okay.
I like my hat. Okay, so land reform.
Okay.
Well-
The second thing that jumped out at me was obviously casino economics. So this comes from a book that Gideon Gono wrote, and
Your governor.
Yeah, our governor. Uh, so the first thing that happened when I
Useful Kindle during winter.
when I first saw this book, obviously it really I was quite livid by the title because obviously the first impression I got was
You're a better man than me. You read it?
no, I haven't read it.
I read it.
Oh, you read it. Okay.
No, I haven't
So
read
don't
it.
insult things you haven't read. Don't.
No, I haven't read it.
Okay.
But like I said, I saw the title. Yeah, and I
it's quite
thought,
obnoxious.
is he trying to say that he gambled with our economy? But then when I thought about it, I think I reached the conclusion that it may actually be a very apt title when you think about how casinos work. So if you go into a casino, the casino always wins, or the house always wins. 99% of the people who go into a casino lose money. 1% who do, there's always lights, bells, whistles announcing that they've won, and that's about it. And when you start thinking about it from the perspective of what happened between, say, 2004 and 2009, effectively that's what happened. 99% of the people lost their life savings, their pensions. 1% of the people probably had big wins for themselves, and the casino won, the casino being the Reserve Bank, I assume. But I think it's very apt to describe what happened.
Okay, so what about Mugabenomics created the casino economy, and what do we learn from that Mtuli and George should take away, and JP?
Okay. I think based on I read an article that Tinashe wrote a couple of weeks, and he surmised that
You shouldn't take Tinashe too seriously.
No. But I don't disagree with what he said. He surmised that the printing started in 1990, and 2007 was obviously when it really started escalating. So 1997. But my view is that the numbers that happened between 2004 and 2008 were so astronomical that whatever happened before had
paled in comparison. Yeah,
it was I think the reason why they stopped announcing, because some of the numbers I had no business knowing, quadrillion, septillion, extillion. So I think it got to the stage, and these are transactions that we were as individuals or as companies were dealing with. And so if that was a company, I would hate to think what the actual money supply was. It would have to be 10 to the power of whatever. You don't even have a name for the number. So I think that was the height of everything. But what I've noticed is that it repeatedly hinges on two types of unbudgeted for expenditure, namely agriculture and the war vets.
Oh, you can't say that.
I can't.
You can't. It's anathema.
No. But look,
But it doesn't matter to me. To me, it doesn't matter what they spent the money on.
No. But I think the point, though, if you go back and you look at it, and I don't think it's a big issue in terms of who the recipients are. But my worry is that it continues. So if you go back to 1997, there was a payment to war vets. Based on they had valid complaints, they felt that they hadn't been taken care of. But the question that I would have is, why is it that the funding never stops for these two particular things? So whether it's agriculture or with and I do think that they're related, because I think the land invasion was started by the war vets. So effectively, if they got onto farms, why are they not yet productive enough to not need further support?
This week, actually, they've been asking for more money. All these.
Yeah. So I suspect that if we can resolve the one, it resolves the other. So if agriculture becomes profitable for them, I don't think they would need any assistance. So I think the question that we should be asking is, what can we do to get ourselves to that stage where every farmer is very productive?
And what is that?
For me, I think that's probably where maybe agri-techs will have to come into play and start. We map everything that's with all the land in the country and say maybe do soil tests, understand what crops are most productive, and try and reach global levels of productivity. So I think once that starts happening, if you're getting yields that happen everywhere else in the world, I think you can start maybe making it a productive
I would hate to run that experiment. I vehemently disagree with that as a possible solution. In fact, it's something I learned from you. We had this discussion some years
you
ago.
learn things from me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm flattered.
No, he only admits it much later.
And so, if you think about Zimbabwe's agricultural history, the immigration of people from the UK pre-independence to Zimbabwe who were allocated land after the pioneer column took over this part of the world, everybody got land, right? But over time, the poor farmers had poor financial performance. They went bankrupt. The bank foreclosed on their land, and they had to sell. And what was happening is that the better farmers, they were making money hand over fist. They were in an in a position to acquire more land from
Acquisitive.
acquisitive. They were in a position to acquire more land from those that were failing, that were being foreclosed by the banks. And over a 30 to 50 year period, you had the number of white commercial farmers whittled down from about 100,000 to just the 5,000, right? And you ended up with some of the best farmers in the world. And it wasn't a top-down process where you had some senior government bureaucrat say, you should be growing that. While you're not doing well, we're going to take your land and give it to so. It was a bottom-up process where the market pretty much sorted itself out. And I think that...
Did Tinashe leave you notes?
No, he didn't. But what I think is, and it ties into what you were saying about title. So if everybody gets title, right, and is able to go to the bank, borrow money to expand their farming operation, the good guys are going to make phenomenal profits. The guys who are not good farmers are going to lose money and get foreclosed by the banks. And when the banks foreclose them, the better farmers are going to grow their land portfolio, and the lousy farmers are going to lose their land. And over the years, where this bottom-up process, the survival of the fittest process, is going to see the very best farmers on the land. And you solve this problem of farmers being profitable. This idea that everybody who's been given a piece of land can be a profitable, productive farmer, that only happens in heaven. Here on earth, it doesn't work.
My view would be, surely you should give them a try. They should.
And it's been 20 years, my guy. And we've had all these subsidies and schemes and programs. Surely, if you can't wash your face, you shouldn't be on a farm.
we are shooting. But this is a good moment for us to wrap this up. Tafadwa, it's been good.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, my guy.
Always
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you
And,
very much.
thank you very much for your deep thoughts and insights. Yeah, it's good to actually have people who think on the show. Once in a while. We're going away for a couple of minutes. See you when we get back. Welcome back. In this segment, we've been joined by an old friend, a namesake, George. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I see you've got your glass
And it's still empty.
ready to receive.
Yeah.
I'm not letting this guy pour for you.
That's why I brought took measure. I obviously brought took measure for a reason.
Because no,
Yeah.
before the shots he poured before.
Yeah. I think that one's okay.
Just one.
Yeah, you can make it a double.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. So George, Rufaro, and I have known each other all our professional lives. We met when we were 18 and green and knowing nothing about the world.
Yeah.
Look at us now. We've got no hair.
There's still nothing about the world.
There's still nothing about the world. So George, just before you came on the show, we had Tafadzwa and Musoni. We were just touching on Mugabenomics, and Tafadzwa had some very, very interesting views on the land reform. He thinks the people who got land should pay for it, not the state.
Yeah.
Rufaro also
The
thinks-
improvements, not the land. Nobody.
Yes.
Yeah.
the improvements to the land. And Rufaro thinks these guys have been on the land for over 20 years now. It's time to wean them off. Your take?
Okay. Now I just learned a new word from Tafaza just now. Revisionist history. Because what we're doing basically is forgetting how this thing came about. When we talk about how the land was taken, it wasn't taken peacefully the first time around. It was taken.
Have you been going to rallies?
No, I haven't. I haven't. And it wasn't taken peacefully the second time around. So that score sort of like levels
It's
us
even.
out. It's even. And
Two wrongs make it right.
they don't. But at the end of the day, there was no peaceful resolution to this. And you rightly said it, there was no right way, there was no wrong way. And then when you look at the production aspect of things, my take on it, which is very straightforward, we've got no statistics whatsoever in terms of how many years the white farmers were supported to get to the level that we were. But there's an expectation somehow within the country for us to put a figure to it and a cutoff and say, okay, after 20 years, we should have a perfect farm. I'm not saying we should not learn from everyone else. But what I'm basically saying is, obviously, when the white farmer came here, he had so much more support than we have. The whole private sector at that time, I mean, we were auditors. Barclays, Stanbic, Stanchart, their business was to support the farmer. And they would not just support the farming of inputs, they would pay your school fees. They would make sure that you go on holiday. And you put that on a nice little budget, and they'll give you that money. But our farmers are expected to just live on inputs. And when they sell those inputs to pay their school fees, we think it's a wrong thing to do. Why is that?
So why aren't they?
So you're saying it's a double standard, basically?
It's not a double standard. It's just a narrative that's controlled by someone that is being fed to the people. So the narrative is basically being controlled by the white person, the white farmer, so to say. And we don't have our voice being heard. So ultimately, remember, I mean, we were grown up then. There was a land conference that was supposed to actually fund this whole thing. And they didn't.
A donor conference, yeah.
A donor conference. And now it's supposed to come out of our taxes to fund the repayment of these guys. Does that actually make sense?
So what are you saying? So what are you saying? I mean, okay, you
What I'm
complain
saying,
about a lot of things.
what I'm
are you
saying
saying?
basically is 20 years later, we've actually got some very productive black farmers. Not all of them are productive, but we all realize that, I mean, our land reform, most of the farmers were subsistence anyway. So there's always going to be a component of that. We don't expect 100% of the farmers to be productive, but if you look at tobacco, we already have some very successful black farmers. If you look at maize, successful black farmers. So I don't see any reason why it should be reversed or any reason why we should say it has and actually succeeded. Because in a way it has much more than we thought.
You're not coming on the show again.
But the facts on the ground.
No, no, I don't disagree with anything that you've said.
Yeah.
You know, look, I think that if you look at tobacco production at a global level, or at a national level, we've surpassed what was done pre-land reform. I don't think that one can say it's failed abysmally across the board. But I think that I don't think that we should have an infinite runway to run this experiment where those that are not productive are still being funded, and those that are incredibly productive, who have capacity to produce more, don't have title and can't expand their operations.
20 years and infinity are totally different things.
Okay, so Rufaro, I'm kind of hearing you agree, but perhaps you're talking more about leadership and policy, and maybe this links back nicely to the previous two segments on Mugabenomics. Is it the policy, or is it the implementation and the leadership of it?
Yeah, look, I think all of those three things are related: leadership, policy, execution. So you can have the right policy, but if you fail to execute, then you're going to have horrible outcomes. If you have the wrong policy, no matter how well you execute on the wrong strategy, you're still going to have a horrible outcome. So I think that what we speak of when we talk about leadership is individuals who have the right vision, the right policy, and the discipline and persistence to execute on that. Yeah. And this is where, when you look at the history of land reform in our country, there have been significant leadership failures, in my mind. I don't know whether you see things differently.
No, I actually agree with you. Everything is linked. With the right leader, you probably get the right policies, and then you probably get the right people to implement.
So, what's your take on how we've done it? And more specifically, let's talk about the Mugabe era. What's your take on the Mugabe era and how we did it?
Now he's putting me in a corner.
You thought the whiskey was free.
I think there have been a lot of leadership gaps. There's certainly ways that could have been done differently, and we didn't. There are chances that we should have taken, and we didn't. I think in the end, it became more an individual living out his own individual vision, nothing for the country. So, like I said, you're putting me in a corner. But ultimately, the land reform, even if you look at the way it was done, like if we actually analyze it, was it really done because we wanted to give land to our people, or because certain individuals wanted to retain power?
So, what's your advice to the current crop of leaders?
I think the advice is simple. If you are a leader, you're supposed to lead. It's not for your own personal benefit. I know we've got all personal aspirations in terms of what we want to achieve. But if you get to the position, what you're trying to do is to actually look at what the people want first before you say, what do I get out of it? And I think that's been probably one of the issues that is
Held us
led
back.
us, yeah, held us back.
He's deep.
I'm not deep. I'm sure we could.
Look, I don't know. I think that I think the issue is less philosophical than that. I think I'm a pragmatist. I don't care for one ideology or the other. I just look at the world and ask myself, so what works? Where have certain ideas worked? Where have they worked well? And why? And
Can
where
I-
have certain ideas failed?
Can I just interrupt you and give you a favorite example? The only reason that China works, and it shouldn't work, is because everyone is united behind the China. Whether the model works or not, they don't care. They know this is what China wants. Because imagine if China was divided into two and saying some of us are capitalists, some of us are socialists, some of us are whatever it is. Do you think China would actually work? 1.6 billion people divided.
No, it wouldn't work.
Exactly. So the only reason why it works is because these guys have managed to get everyone behind.
Yeah,
Whether you call it whatever you want to call it, behind their ideals, socialism, communism, those are just words when you think about it. No one actually has a perfect communism system, socialist system,
There
capitalist
is no
system.
such thing as a.
There's nothing as that. So basically what China has done, and I'm just getting to example, is get everyone behind. Like right now, I mean, Xi is telling people to tell their kids to watch 3 hours of TV a day. And everyone in China is like, it's okay.
3 hours of video games.
Yeah, 3 hours of video games.
Yeah.
That's how getting people behind a vision works. But we've never had that in Zim.
You know
Yeah.
what's interesting, George? Sorry to interrupt, but over the last 3/4 of an hour
Yeah.
that we've been on the show, I've struggled to get everybody who sat where you're sitting and to get Rufaro to pin the discussion on Mugabe.
Yeah.
Somehow the discussion keeps coming back to an issue of the nation and an issue of national policy. So I mean, I guess perhaps you're tying it together quite nicely. That it's not about
It's not about
it's not about
the
Mugabe,
nation.
it's not about
Yeah.
Mnangagwa.
Yeah.
It's about us as a nation. Our
And what
hopes
do
and
you want our
aspirations.
Zimbabwe to be?
So really, the ball is in our court, not
No,
in the leaders' court.
It's
Look, I
a
think
difficult.
leadership makes a difference.
It does actually, yeah. I was
So
supposed
look
to
at.
agree with it.
See, I was actually going to counter his point on China with North Korea. Okay.
You like rabbit holes, eh?
It's not a rabbit hole, but it's a nation that exists on this planet. Okay? And we
It is
can,
a rabbit hole.
and we can and do you get the sense that they are not united in North Korea?
Yeah, but does it work?
It doesn't.
Exactly.
Do you think
That's exactly the point.
Do you think they are
That's
really
exactly the
united?
point.
Do you ever hear from the people who don't agree with Kim?
Exactly. Maybe they're all dead. We don't-
But anyway,
So-
coming back to our present reality,
Yeah.
we do like to touch on a few current issues before we end the show. And I think one that all three of us would be unanimous in celebrating is our new independence. This week,
We get to go out and drink at restaurants.
Oh, okay. I was wondering what you guys are talking about.
so happy independence!
You and me have been doing that. Okay.
But also, I mean, interesting in the news, a couple of FMCG companies reported their numbers, and a few months ago we had, I think, first quarter numbers. Now we have half year numbers coming out of FMCG companies. BAT, cigarette company. I like BAT,
Even though you don't smoke.
even though I don't smoke, but as a
an
proxy
investment.
for
Aggregate demand.
sales over 23% up.
In US dollars.
Units.
Oh, units. Okay.
Dairy board, 55% up. But we sit here week after week and say the economy is not doing well. 55%. They say the dairy board says these are the best sales they've seen in 5 years.
Yeah, people are locked down smoking and drinking milk.
So is the economy doing badly? Is the economy doing badly?
I think that's more his territory than me. But yeah.
Look, I think that those numbers, dairy board and BAT, they speak to aggregate demand. And notwithstanding our previous discussion about maize deliveries to GMB, I think that the agricultural season was good. People did do significantly better than they did last year. So those farmers, whether they delivered to GMB or not, the fact that they had a better harvest would be they would be in a position to consume more cigarettes and milk. Does that mean that the economy is thriving, that we're in a great place? I think that's a different question, because also the other thing, and Tinashe would hate me using this expression that
He's not here. He doesn't matter to them.
base effects, that's what economists call them, right? So you're talking about 23% unit increase at BAT, you're talking about 50% at dairy board, but what is the base for that percentage increase?
Well, but that's why I brought in the point that dairy board says this is the highest sales they've had in 5 years.
5
Yeah,
years was GNU.
Yes, and so 5 years from 2021 is what? 2016.
Yeah, I look, I could be wrong, but I suspect that for dairy board, a lot of that has to just do with the competitive space where you have had Dairy and these other players come in and chow their lunch over the last few years, and they probably have got their act together and clawed back a bunch of that market share. I don't think it speaks to just aggregate demand at a national level. I think it speaks more to the dynamics in the dairy industry and how well dairy board is doing relative to the competition.
But I mean, all year we haven't had any listed companies reporting that volumes are massively off. You've had them holding constant or rising.
Yes, so BAT is a better example because they don't really have a very competitive landscape in terms of the market, or their market share tends to hold somewhat steady. So we can attribute that 23% to base effects. That this time last year, people were really struggling. There was a COVID lockdown. We were coming out of a drought, so people really didn't have the disposable income to smoke as much as they'd like, and the volumes took a significant dip. And we then had a good rainy season, and people are in a better place, disposable income-wise, so they're consuming a bit more. So if you think about it in the context of the base being lower, then 23% increase isn't anything to write home about.
Yeah.
You're just determined. This is bad news, aren't you?
I mean, look, I could be wrong. Perhaps the economy is doing much better than I'm giving it credit for, but I don't get that sense. I don't. And when you look at what's happening on the power market with the printing, when you look at the West Europe deciding that Zimbabweans will be significantly better off getting a stipend of $12 a month, I think it tells you that we're not in great shape. So look, at the very best, the data is mixed. I would not want to be overly optimistic.
You can never get this guy.
But what I will say that's very positive, is that the COVID numbers in terms of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths have improved a lot, and the vaccination levels are ticking up. And with any luck, touch wood, we as a country and the world in general might be at a place where the third wave of COVID is the last significant wave, and we are moving into a post-COVID environment in which things go back to normal. So that is positive for us as Zimbabweans, and it's positive for the world. So I am capable of saying something positive.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe that brings us to the end of the show. It's been lovely having you along. As always, we love having interactions with you on our social media handles. We're there on Facebook, we're there on Twitter, we're there on YouTube. Please let us know what you think of the issues discussed. Please let us know what you think of today's format, which is slightly different. I'm sure quite a lot of you miss Tinashe. He'll be back
Eventually, maybe.
with his colorful pants and interesting socks.
Statistics.
And statistics. Yeah. Last word.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we don't discuss enough as Zimbabweans is our leaders. And that's primarily because we get our leadership skills from books that are written in Harvard and all over the place. I'm sure there's a sweet point where leadership mixes the African leadership and so forth and so on. So, yeah, it's said that we don't have enough leaders actually writing their books or writing books about leadership, so that we learn from their mistakes and we appreciate any words of wisdom that they've got. I think as a last word, basically, I think I picked this from the internet, but it seemed very apt. It says the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. And I think where we are in Zimbabwe, we failing to actually appreciate that, and we may need to get more leadership out in churches, business, and politics. I know the focus is all on politics, but I think as a leadership, the whole of Zimbabwe is struggling right now, and we need to start creating more leaders.
COVID is real. Be safe. Be good. If you can't be good at it. Have a lovely weekend.